Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this special council meeting. We acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of this land, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and their elders past and present. I would like to advise everyone that the audio and video of this meeting is being live streamed to YouTube. I request everyone to please turn off your mobile phones. I remind you that audio recording of the meeting proceedings and photography within the chamber is prohibited unless prior approval has been granted, and councillors and city officers are reminded to disclose any declarations of financial interests and interests affecting impartiality, and are requested to activate their microphones when addressing the meeting. So, with that, we turn to item 1, which is the declaration of opening. I declare this meeting open at 6 p.m. Disclaimer. Members of the public are cautioned against taking any action as a result of a council decision until such time as they have seen a copy of the minutes or been advised in writing by the council's administration with regard to any particular decision. Item 2 is announcements from the presiding member, and councillors, tonight is Morgan Hindle's first council meeting since returning to the City of South Perth on a temporary basis as Acting Manager of Governance. Morgan, on behalf of Council, we're delighted for your return. Welcome back. Tony Fry, Manager of Governance, is currently reporting directly to the Acting Chief Executive Officer, working on key governance projects, recognising her skills, capabilities and knowledge in this area. And I would also like to welcome James McGovern, the General Manager of Governance and Compliance at the Local Government Inspector. Mr McGovern will observe tonight's meeting and can perform the monitor's functions if required. That brings us to item 3, which is attendance. Item 3.1 is apologies. I haven't received any apologies for this evening. Item 3.2 is approved leaves of absence, and that is nil for this evening. Item 4 is declarations of interest. Councillors, does anyone have any declarations of interest that they'd like to make this evening? And I'm going to take that as a no. Okay. Item 5 is public question time. And in accordance with Regulation 7 of the Local Government Administration Regulations 1996, all questions asked at this meeting must relate to the purpose of the meeting. So with that, I open public question time at 2 minutes past 6 p.m. We've received 6 written submissions prior to tonight's meeting, and I'd like to begin by inviting Mr. Max McCura of South Perth. If you'd like to come to the microphone, welcome to you. And we look forward to your questions.
I take it the micro... Oh, it's on. Very good. Okay, let's begin. So I understand that the City makes available to its employees an employee assistance program that was recognised in 2023 for its excellence in workplace wellbeing. This program includes an external provider who delivers professional, confidential counselling to help staff manage personal and work-related challenges. The City also maintains a mental health first aid officers on site to provide immediate assistance. Doesn't this show that the City of South Perth aims to comply with work, safety and health regulations?
Thank you for the question. Acting CEO, Anita Amprimo.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, that does.
Thank you. As allegedly there are workplace issues within the City of South Perth workplace at present, have any employees availed themselves of this employee assistance program, believing that their mental health and wellbeing are under threat?
Thank you. Ms Amprimo.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So the EAP access is private and confidential. Therefore, the City doesn't receive any information about who accesses these services.
Thank you. If an employee of the council has a grievance with an officer or a councillor, would they not submit a code of conduct complaint, which is available for this purpose to deal with the grievance?
Thank you for the question. Ms Amprimo.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. So employees can submit a grievance in accordance with the relevant policies and processes. It's not possible for the city to comment on why a complaint would not be submitted.
Yeah, I just want to know.
Thank you, Ms Amprimo, and
Thank
thank you,
you.
Mr. Smakura.
Thank you.
I'd now like to invite Mr. Aidan Carlson of Karawara to the microphone. Welcome to you. The microphone is yours, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you for the opportunity to ask questions. So raising a revocation motion is highly unusual for this council. As far as I could tell, only 2 in the last 15 years. Happy to be corrected. One being about 6 years ago, which was required due to an error council made impacting the budget and clearly required revocation. The other was last year with 6 trees after an almost 700-person petition. And special electors meeting unanimously seeking revocation, and yet that community-backed revocation motion failed. So tonight my questions seek to clarify whether there is sufficient new information that would justify the risks that come with revocation motions. That is, they could provide an opportunity for councillors to reflect poorly on other councillors and the council, and gives very public indication of dysfunction within the city. So question 1. The West Australian newspaper reported on Thursday, March 26, in an article entitled, "It's Heading South for Coyote Council," that CEO Liz Ledger has gone off on long-term stress leave. Corporate Services Director Bree Webstale and Tony Fry have walked off the job on extended leave. Will the city please confirm whether these 3 senior staff have in fact walked off the job on extended leave, as stated? And will you confirm how many city staff are currently on extended leave, citing psychosocial risks as the primary reason for leave as of 5 p.m. yesterday?
Thank you for the question. Ms Amprimo.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. So the CEO, Liz Ledger, and Director of Corporate Services, Bree Webstale, are currently on personal leave. Contrary to the recent media reports, the Manager of Governance, Tony Fry, is not on personal leave and is currently reporting directly to myself, working on key governance projects which recognise her skills, capabilities and knowledge in this area. With respect to the purposes of any staff being on leave and the second part of your question, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to answer that.
Okay, thank you. Question number 2. This revocation motion cites communication on 25th of March from the Monitor, Ms McGowan, to the council, citing various staff on leave who have cited psychosocial risks. Will the city please confirm whether this information was already known to the council via the email from the CEO on the 23rd of March, and what significant new information became available to the city in the hours between the motion passing on the evening of the 24th of March 2026 and the revocation motion being lodged on the 25th of March?
Thank you for the question. Ms Amprimo.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. The city is unclear as to what correspondence this question is referencing.
Okay. Can I answer that? Yeah. It's the correspondence. It's the actual motion itself.
Oh, I've got to be fair to everyone, Mr Carlson. I'll have to get you to move on to question 3.
That's fine. Given the likelihood of this revocation not meeting the requirements to succeed at this council meeting, does the city consider that this revocation motion itself risks further damage to the city's reputation through councillors reflecting poorly on other councillors, the council, as well as indicating further dysfunction on the council?
Thank you for the question. Ms Amprimo.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. So the city cannot comment on what council may or may not resolve in considering this item.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Amprimo, and thank you, Mr Carlson, for the questions. I'd now like to invite Ms Joanne Ord of Como to the microphone. Welcome to you, Ms Ord. The microphone is yours, and we look forward to your questions.
Hello, once again. So there are differing opinions about the efficacy of psychosocial assessments, and some say the only party that benefits from them is the consultant. We know via the ABC that the City of Perth CEO engaged Azure to conduct their assessment, which involved interviews of 14 staff, executives, selected members, and one elected member reportedly described it as being a little biased. We also know the Shire of Serpentine and Jarrahdale received and considered their own assessment just last month by Epi Group, and this was at their Audit and Risk and Improvement meeting just last month. And this subsequent month in March, they've resolved to formally request a monitor, and that was all available on their website. So it looks like there's a bit of process happening at Serpentine, and it's a lovely word, isn't it? Process. At our Audit and Risk meeting on the 10th of March, minutes available online, there was no mention of psychosocial hazards or impending assessment. On the 23rd of March, less than 2 weeks later, the CEO emailed Council advising that Azure will conduct an assessment. Other exec were not copied to that email, and yet the sole representation the following night at the OCM.
Ms Ord, I've got to be fair to everyone. I might get you to... Thanks.
Hurry along, yes. And we know the monitor finishes on the 29th, and so any external consultant will likely have commenced before then. So there is a real possibility that we will end up with 2 reports coming in just weeks or perhaps even days apart. And so it's incredibly important to get this process right, not least because us little old ratepayers are likely paying for it. So the reason for the revocation asserts not to proceed with the appointment of Azure in the present circumstances is not appropriate. And this confirms to me that Azure has not yet been appointed. So I see an opportunity to perhaps correct an oversight in the proposed scope of assessment. So, number 1, can the scope be revised to include working relations between all executive staff and managers as a minimum?
Thank you for the question. Ms Ampremo.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So the CEO has the ability to determine a scope for any required assessment under the obligations as the person conducting a business or undertaking.
Thank you, Ms Ampremo. Your second question, Ms Ord.
Okay, so given there are clearly other providers in Perth who conduct these assessments and the city must strive for efficient, effective and proper expenditure of public monies based on achieving value for money, will the city consider alternative consultants?
Ms Ampremo.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, the city will follow policy P605 in requesting written quotations.
Okay. Number 3. The Epi Group report from Serpentine refers to data sources used to inform their analysis, and for example, hazard reports and incident notifications, reporting, escalation and decision-making records, exit interview themes and employee surveys. And this data can reveal trends over time, let's say 2 to 3 years, for example, and can highlight timeframes of concern. Can the city advise if all the aforementioned documents will be made available to the chosen consultant?
Thank you. Ms Ampremo.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So the consultant will be requested to undertake the works to meet the scope and requirements of the relevant code of practice.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms Ampremo, and thank you, Ms Ord, for the questions.
Thank you.
I'd now like to invite Dr Sue Gilliott of Salter Point. If you'd like to come to the microphone, welcome to you, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and councillors and city officers. Psychosocial harms or hazards are a recent workplace phenomenon in Australian industrial relations. Having worked in social work management and leadership roles, I'm the first to say that psychosocial harms and hazards are real and legitimate. But given such harms are mostly perception-based and often involve power differences, when people claim workplace harms, responders are sometimes timid about processes to systematically and justly address the issue. Given harms are in the eye of the beholder, I think we all know they can be prone to creative interpretation. At the very least, we'd expect any incident to have met the criteria of a notifiable concern under the Work Health and Safety Act. My first question: assuming the psychosocial harms and hazards raised for the city are so serious to warrant independent, urgent consideration, point 1 of tonight's motion, and the Work Health Safety Act was cited as a reason to move forward with an independent assessment, can the City confirm that concerns have reached the threshold of notification and indeed formal reports setting out complaints with relevant evidence have been compiled and submitted?
Thank you for the question. Ms Ampremo.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Undertaking of a psychosocial risk assessment are part of managing risks for a PCBU. The level of any risk will be determined by the independent report.
Although no harms or hazards were reported at the Audit Risk and Improvement meeting 10th of March, this suggests matters have deteriorated in just 3 weeks. Even so, there is still reason to tread slowly, in a measured way. In the first instance, an anonymous independent cultural safety audit could have been helpful to understand the nature and depth of any problem. Rushing in and demanding an urgent psychosocial risk assessment on what appears to be an absence of documented or recorded evidence may cause more harm. Not only that, we have a ratepayer-funded local government monitor already addressing some of these issues. These are not matters for political grandstanding. Question 2. Given point 3 of the revocation motion about urgency, why must a psychosocial risk assessment be completed rapidly in 28 days when the monitor is already undertaking a similar related scope of work to be ready at the end of April?
Thank you for the question. Ms Ampremo.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. The revocation motion includes a request for an interim report on progress within 28 days. The scope and execution of the monitor's work does not replace the obligations of the PCBU.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms Ampremo. And your final question, Dr Gilliott.
So there has been a plethora of media articles authored by Sophie Gannon and Charlton Hart in Perth Now and in the West Australian. These articles quote several sources within the city and council sources. Having been a keen observer of this council for the last decade, I know that in this chamber tonight we have a good number of highly competent, independent, community-focused councillors and executive officers who the community deeply respects. The recent media coverage appears biased and frames the entire council and city to be in disarray. Out here in the community, we do not see this. Question 3. Given the relentless media coverage, which appears to be a sustained and coordinated representation against the city and council, described as reputational damage and given a risk rating of medium, which city officers and councillors are authorised to speak to the media about anything, including psychosocial harms and hazards, in the intra-council work and council administrator work environments?
Thank you for the question. Ms Ampremo.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In accordance with Section 2.81A of the Local Government Act 1995, the Mayor is the principal spokesperson for the City. The City also follows Policy P624, Media Communications.
Thank you, Ms Ampremo, and thank you, Dr Gilliott, for the questions. I'd now like to invite Dr Louise Johnston of Como, if you'd like to come to the microphone. Welcome to you, and we look forward to your questions.
Good evening, everybody. As a community member who is observing developments at the council from the exterior, I note that there does not seem to be a policy or standard methodology for managing relationships between members of the council and/or administration where these have broken down. In contrast, most private sector organisations deal with grievances or disharmony or harassment within their organisation by arranging for the parties directly involved to meet individually together with an independent and unbiased mediator, so that any matters of disagreement can be resolved in a calm, open and frank manner. This is always highly confidential and held behind closed doors due to the sensitivity of relationships and associated behaviour. It is conducted without partition. It is conducted without participation by any other parties, except where they might be asked to give evidence or corroboration.
And Dr.
Please,
Johnston,
could you-
I do apologise. I'm going to interrupt very, very briefly just to extend public question time by a further 15 minutes. Please continue. Sorry for the interruption.
No problem. Please, could you clarify if there are any formal grievance processes available to elected members or the city administrators or members of the community, all of who participate in the business of the council, and whether these processes work consistently and in an effective and efficient way?
Thank you for the question. Ms Ampremo.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, the city does have formal processes and endeavours to ensure they're dealt with in an efficient and effective way.
My second question is, where it is observed that elected members of the council appear to be attempting to subvert or undermine the business, either processes or matters of the movement of the city, by threatening and intimidating colleagues or community members, or wasting the time and resources of the council and ratepayers via inappropriate actions and debate, or deviating from factual information to influence an outcome, should there not be a facility for the mayor or other senior individual to step in and deal with this behaviour in a punitive form, thereby causing it to cease?
Thank you for the question. Ms Ampremo.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the Local Government Act 1995 outlines the role of the Mayor, including providing leadership and guidance to Council and Council members, including guidance as to the role of Council and Council members. The Code of Conduct for Council members, committee members and candidates includes mechanisms for dealing with alleged breaches of the requirements of the Code and potential penalties that apply. The Local Government Inspector can investigate and take action on specified breaches of the Local Government Act 1995 and general complaints.
Thank you. And my third question is, in the event that a decision is taken to dissolve the current council membership due to the perception that the council is irreversibly dysfunctional, what would be the process followed to re-establish the leadership and elected membership body?
Thank you for the question. Ms Ampremo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the process will be undertaken in accordance with the relevant legislation. If council is dismissed, the governor will generally appoint a commissioner or joint commissioners to exercise the powers and discharge the duties of the council. An order dismissing a council is to fix a day for the full election of a new council.
Thank you, Ms Ampremo, and thank you, Dr Johnston, for the questions.
Thank you very much.
I'd now like to invite Ms Bronwyn-David of South Perth to the microphone. Welcome to you. The microphone is yours, and we look forward to your questions.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity. As some other presenters have already indicated, we do have a process underway, as illustrated by the presence of the acting monitor, to examine what's going on here. This motion is to enable a different process to take place, and it's all being paid for by the ratepayers. So my first question is, what is the cost to ratepayers of the monitor presently appointed to look into the City of South Perth Council?
I don't think I can allow that specific question because all the public questions for a special council meeting need to relate specifically to the purpose of the special council meeting. You can certainly ask that at the next ordinary council meeting, but I've had the liberty of seeing questions 2 and 3 and they're fine. So
Excellent. Okay. So next question, do we have an estimate of the cost of engaging Azure Consulting?
thank you. Ms Ampremo?
Yeah, Azure have not been engaged to undertake the psychosocial risk assessment. Therefore, it's not possible to confirm what the estimated cost may be.
Thank you. And what is the cost of convening this meeting tonight?
Thank you. Ms Ampremo?
It is officer and elected member time.
Thank you, Ms Ampremo, and thank you, Ms David, for the questions. Okay, I'll just check with governance to see if there is any late questions in the tray. No, there's not. Okay. In that case, I close public question time at 6:24 p.m. That brings us to item 6 of tonight's agenda, entitled Reports. Item 6.0.1 is Revocation. Councillor Tim Howling. Item 14, New Business of an Urgent Nature. An absolute majority is required for this item. The revocation motion was submitted by Councillor Tim Howling and is supported by Councillor Bronwyn Moore and Councillor Hayley Prendeville. I'm now going to defer to the Acting Manager of Governance, Mr Morgan Hindle, to outline the process for considering this motion. Mr Hindle.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It is the City's advice that tonight's business be dealt with in the following manner. Council will first consider Councillor Howling's motion to revoke Council Resolution 326061, adopted at the Ordinary Council meeting held on 24 March 2026, item 14. This is the purpose of tonight's special council meeting. The process will be as follows. First, Council will consider a motion to revoke the decision moved by Councillor Howling. This motion requires an absolute majority to be carried. If the motion to revoke is carried, Council will then consider the second part of Councillor Howling's motion. This is the replaced with component. Once the motion is moved and seconded, it will be open for debate. At this point, the Mayor may foreshadow a motion and read it aloud so the meeting is aware of the Mayor's proposed motion in relation to the replaced with component. Councillor Howling's motion will be dealt with first. If that motion is not carried, the foreshadowed motion from the Mayor will then be considered. This will not be treated as an alternative motion, but rather as a foreshadowed motion. I might quickly explain what a foreshadowed motion is. A foreshadowed motion is a proposed suggestion to the meeting, usually raised during debate, that there is an alternative proposal should the motion being debated be lost. Foreshadowed motions are usually noted by the presiding member, and if the vote is lost, the member who proposed the foreshadowed motion will be invited to move their foreshadowed motion. Once moved, the motion is debated in the normal manner. This is part of the meeting guidelines from the Department of the Local Government.
Thank you, Mr Hindle. So, we start with the motion to revoke, and this is purely the motion to revoke Council Decision 326 of 61. That will require an absolute majority. I will invite Councillor Howling to move that. Do you wish to do so, Councillor? Councillor Russell?
Sorry, can I just have clarification? So the revocation, is that for both the substantive and the foreshadowed revocation? Because both have a revocation part to it.
Mr Hindle?
No, we're just dealing with part one, the decision made at the past council meeting. Yep.
Perhaps maybe we can get the revocation part up on the screens so that councillors and the gallery can see. So, councillors, what I'm about to seek a mover and a seconder for is the part that is purely revoking Council Decision 326/061. So perhaps if we can scroll down so we can see all of that. So we've got the motion that was carried at item 14 of last week's ordinary council meeting, carried 5 votes to 3. What we're about to have moved and seconded and then debate is purely revoking item 14 of last week's ordinary council meeting. If that's successful, Councillor Howling will then be invited to move the second part of what's confusingly called the revocation motion, but is in fact what he proposes to substitute in place of the revoked decision from item 14 of last week. And governance, if we can scroll so we can see what that substituted decision is. Okay, so we can see that on the screen now. Points 1, 2, 3, 4, and I think there's a few more points after that, 7 points in total. So that will be the second thing, effectively the second sub-item that we're going to consider tonight. If that carries, it carries. If it doesn't carry, I will be moving my foreshadowed motion, which if we can scroll down, it has 3 points to it. And I'll get Mr. Hindle to confirm, but I understand that's the advice that we've received from the department about how we have to deal with tonight. Is that correct, Mr. Hindle?
That's the city's advice.
My bad. The city's advice. Okay. All right. I'll give anyone an opportunity to ask any questions if they want to ask any questions about that, so that we're all on the same page and we all understand what's coming next. Councillor Russell?
So to be clear, there's only one revocation motion. We're not going to go through Councillor Howelling's motion and then follow up with another revocation as part of the Mayor's motion. Is that correct?
Mr. Hindle?
That's correct.
All right. I'll give an opportunity for anyone else who wants to ask any questions if they would like to do so. No? Hopefully we're all on the same page then. Great. In that case, we now move to the revocation motion, which is purely and only a motion revoking item 14 from last week's ordinary council meeting. Councillor Howling, do you wish to move that?
Thank you. And Mr Mayor, if I can move what was circulated, which was signed being the motion, what's replicated within the papers distributed and on the agenda is not quite what was sent around. It was in two parts, and that first part is that council, and this is the motion, council rescinds the resolution being item 14 of 24 March 2026, being the CEO in the terms of the motion, which included within item 14 that, and this is what we're then going to revoke or rescind, 1, discontinue all work on the psychosocial assessment described in the email from the Chief Executive Officer to councillors dated the 23rd of March 2026. 2, convene a workshop inviting A, the Chief Executive Officer, B, councillors, C, 2 external expert members of the Audit Risk and Improvement Committee and the local government monitor to discuss the proper scope for a formal assessment of the workplace conditions, culture and psychosocial health and safety, workplace assessment, and the appropriate timing of the workplace assessment, given the monitor is currently anticipated to assist in the development of an action plan setting out necessary governance and or relationship improvements being the action plan, and provide a report being the monitor report to the local government inspector by the 29th of June 2026. And following the above workshop, a confidential item at the next Audit Risk and Improvement Committee, the AIR Committee meeting, proposed the scope of the works for the workplace assessment and outlining the process by which the council will be appointed in the external body that performs a workplace assessment. That's the external body, and following the AIR committee meeting, present the AIR committee's recommendation to council as a confidential item for decision. So that was the first part of what I had circulated, being the revocation motion. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
All right. Would anyone like to second that motion? Councillor Waugh. Councillor Howling, the floor is yours for your reasons.
Thank you. Firstly, it needs to be borne clearly in mind that the way within which the Act is structured, and that's the Work Health and Safety Act, provides that the Chief Executive Officer is allocated with the role. So when this motion was originally put, you will recall that we raised the question of the lawfulness of the motion as put, because the Chief Executive Officer has the role under Section 19 to ensure that the workplace is maintained within the boundaries of what is necessary to ensure a safe workplace. What that means is that the law, that's the legislation, allocates to the Chief Executive Officer the role. It doesn't, in other words, subsist amongst us as the council members, which we then delegate to the Chief Executive Officer. Rather, an Act of Parliament which has been passed allocates a particular person to that role. Now, under the provisions of the Work Health and Safety Act, it is possible for that person, being the PCUB, as I explained to Ms Anne Promo this afternoon, the Acting Chief Executive Officer, to be the person who ultimately would take responsibility. That means that they would be the person who would need to ensure that the workplace is operating in a manner which is safe. And that includes psychosocial safety. and that is that the local government has to ensure the psychological health in its risk assessments. In other words, the Chief Executive Officer has to know what's going on within the workplace and has to know and understand what's happening and has to make sure that the workplace is in fact carrying out its duties, or she's carrying out, or the CEO is carrying out its duties in accordance with the requirements of the Act. It's non-delegable, means she can't delegate that, or the Chief Executive Officer, whoever that might be, male or female, can't delegate that to anybody else. They are responsible. Now, in so doing, in so suggesting that the power rested with the council to overturn what is contained within the Act, that's the Work Health and Safety Act, this council acted unlawfully. It acted unlawfully because it tried to override what was contained within the Act. And so there was no power for it to do so. Now, it could be that we just leave it rest there. But it's not what I think is appropriate, that we just simply say, oh, well, it is unlawful, and for that reason it has no lawful effect, and for that reason perhaps it could be argued by some, and it might be, that therefore we don't even need to pass a resolution to amend or revoke. I don't share that view. It's my view that we have to take this seriously. There have been matters that give rise to a proper basis for the study being carried out. And I understand some concerns that members of the community may wish to raise, and I will be amending whether or not it's Azure or another independent expert in a moment, as to the cost of such an undertaking. How much does this cost the council? And that's a reasonable question. But the cost of not doing it is even greater. We cannot just override what the Chief Executive Officer's responsibilities are and say we're going to ignore those and then suggest that they're not permitted to undertake it. If you need convincing that this cost is legitimate, in my short time that I've been on council, I say that the raft issue, which the community raised significant concerns about, gave rise to a very serious issue that arose in the council, and that was how the Chief Executive Officer would direct the intersection between elected members and operational persons who were attending certain meetings. Now, that gave rise to certain issues which I saw the genesis in the raft issue from the small time or short time that I was on council. From that time and until now, there have been, in my view, an undermining, at least in some respects, of good governance. There's been internal tensions. And this has been reflected at time to time with the way within which the Chief Executive Officer may be responded to. And I think here of those who attended the Audit, Governance and Risk meeting where there was an issue raised associated with the Public Sector Commissioner's governance report. And it was suggested that that was just her view, in effect.
That's 5 minutes,
And
Councillor Howling. I'll move a motion that you be granted a further 5 minutes. Would anyone be willing to second that motion? Councillor Prendeville. Councillors, please cast your votes on a motion that Councillor Howling be granted a further 5 minutes. And the votes are in. Those who voted in favour were Councillor Brenda Abrandis, Councillor De Souza, Councillor Howling, Councillor Lees, Mayor Milner, Councillor Prendeville, Councillor Raison and Councillor Waugh. Those against were Councillor Russell. The motion has carried 8 votes to 1. But just before you continue, Councillor Howling, I sense that you might be starting to get off track of the pure intent of the motion. Please do keep it relevant to the motion that's before us. You may continue.
certainly I will, and the basis for why we need to revoke it, because the reason for why we need this psychosocial analysis and study is evident, and the community would be asking questions as they have done tonight. And the only things that I'm referring to is those matters which at least those who are attentive and have been attending council meetings would be aware of as a result. As a consequence of all of this, the Chief Executive Officer's duty and responsibility to ensure that there is a workplace that is both safe and avoids tensions of the nature seen and the governance risks that are associated with the sorts of issues that, for example, not accepting the public sector commissioners and related governance report.
Now you are getting off track, Councillor Howling. Bring it back, please.
Has resulted in a need for a study such as this. And so for anybody who believes that we ought to, that we, in any event, we don't really care what is said in respect of the PCUB, and that is, it doesn't matter, we still think that it's not necessary to undertake this study. I urge you to think about what has gone on, and I urge you to think carefully about the way within which the Chief Executive Officer, who's not here anymore, has had interactions from time to time. And for that reason, there is a basis on which this study can be properly undertaken. There are reasons for why it was put forward in the first place, and the knee-jerk response to ask for it not to be continued within a few hours of it being put forward, when we received a motion at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, was, with the greatest of respect, a very regrettable process that I've rarely seen for very urgent matters being put onto the table that didn't enable all of us to give careful consideration to the matters that were at hand. Accordingly, very shortly put, there is a need for this study to be undertaken. There is a purpose to this study being undertaken. And there's a legislative responsibility on the Chief Executive Officer for this study to be undertaken. We cannot subvert that, and for that reason I ask you to support the revocation of this motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Howling. Councillor Waugh, you're the seconder. Would you like to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm supporting this revocation motion tonight, and I do want to be quite clear as to why. It's not about revisiting a decision for the sake of it. It's not about personalities, and neither is it about positions. It's pure and simply about good governance and correcting a decision that, in my view, overstepped the role of council. At our last meeting, council made a decision that directed the CEO to discontinue work on the psychosocial risk assessment and prescribed how certain matters ought to be progressed. In doing so, this council crossed a line. The motion as passed by this council prevented the CEO from carrying out her lawful duties and responsibilities as required under the Act. And that is absolutely not our role, because council is not the operational arm of this organisation. We were told recently at a workshop that good governance requires nose in and fingers out approach. The motion as passed last week was not that. We are not here to manage the day-to-day functions, operations, staff and internal culture. We are not here to control how the CEO is to do her job or to prevent her from doing it as that motion attempts to do. Rather, it is our role to support the CEO to equip her with the tools to do those things. We are here to provide strategic direction, oversight and accountability. And that distinction matters. It's not just a technicality, it's fundamental to how a local government is supposed to function. When council starts directing operational decisions, particularly in areas like workplace health and safety, it doesn't strengthen governance, it undermines it. It blurs accountability, and we place ourselves in a position where we are neither designed nor equipped to occupy. There's also a broader principle at play here. Council cannot and should not be in control of everything. Good governance requires trust in the structures that we have in place, including the role of the CEO. It requires us to set the framework, but not to step into the detail. And when we lose sight of that, we risk creating exactly the kind of dysfunction that we are trying to resolve. This revocation motion is important because it restores that balance. It recognises that the previous decision went too far into the operational territory, and it corrects the course in a way that is measured, appropriate and grounded in proper governance. It also ensures that the issues before us, serious issues relating to workplace culture and psychosocial risk, are not ignored or diminished, but are instead considered properly, independently and without interference. Because if there are concerns, they must be addressed, but they must be addressed in the right way. So ultimately, this is about leadership. And leadership is not about holding on to a decision if it is flawed. Leadership is about recognising when something needs to be corrected and having the integrity to do so. Supporting this motion is not an admission of failure, but it's a demonstration of good governance, sound judgment, and respect for the roles that each of us play. So I support this revocation motion because it does what council should always strive to do. It puts us back in our lane. It reinforces proper governance boundaries, and it ensures that we are acting in the best interests of the organisation and the community that we serve. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waugh. Councillors, does anyone wish to speak against the revocation itself? Councillor Raison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. If I understand the basis or the primary basis for this revocation, it seems to raise issues of illegality. In my view, it's not appropriate to proceed on the basis of the personal legal views of any councillor, no matter how well intentioned. Any legal advice should be provided by an independent lawyer who has been retained to provide independent legal advice to the council. That legal advice will be independent and it will ordinarily also be protected by legal professional privilege. The lawyer will also be required to have professional indemnity insurance in place in relation to the legal advice they provide. Council will then have a potential professional indemnity claim against the lawyer or law firm if they provide negligent advice. For all these reasons, if legal advice is important to the matter being considered by the council, it should be provided by an independent lawyer. This is appropriate for risk management and is good governance. And I would say that it's open to the acting CEO to take that independent legal advice, and she may well have taken it already. I would also add that the duties of the acting CEO in terms of being the PCBU seem to be unfettered, and that's evidenced by the fact that she is considering proceeding with the psychosocial harm assessment through another scoping process. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Raison. Councillors, would someone like to speak in favour of the revocation? Councillor Lees.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's disappointing that we've had to come back here today, and I recognise that the community are also very concerned about this. It's not a great use of admin time or ratepayer money, and that's frustrating for everyone. But the reality is that at the time of last week's council resolution, the executive and staff in the room hadn't been briefed on the CEO's 23rd of March announcement. The plans to do the assessment, what the scope would be, or the appointment of a ZILR, which it seems didn't happen. That meant the governance advice that we got at the time was limited, and it made it hard for council to make a fully informed call. But like Councillor Raison, I am very mindful that as a councillor, I am required to follow the legal advice, or the governance advice and legal advice provided and obtained by the city, rather than relying solely on the opinions of other councillors, regardless of their professional expertise. So with that in mind, we were in a position where we didn't have the full information, but we now have clear advice from the acting CEO about her role and obligations as the PCBU. As the officer report says, it's her job to decide whether a risk assessment is needed and to set the scope, and she says she'll take that forward. With that context matters, and it's why I'm not opposing the revocation in front of us today. Given that direction, it makes sense to overturn the earlier decision to pause the process, recognising that revocations aren't a common thing and should not be a common thing, and need to be avoided wherever possible. But I would like to say that I'm still not really comfortable with the CEO's original decision to start the assessment immediately, while acknowledging her role as the CEO as the PCBU. We already had a monitor looking at governance, relationships and decision-making across the organisation, so kicking off a separate assessment at the time, to me, felt premature. I'm not going to speculate on why the CEO chose to do that, but it's clear her executive team wasn't fully consulted, and as far as I'm aware, there wasn't any engagement with the monitor either, but I'm happy to be corrected on that. Either way, this is where things have landed, this is where we're at now, and it's now appropriate for the acting CEO to move forward on that basis. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lees. Councillors, would anyone like to speak against the revocation, remembering that we're only talking about the revocation at this point in time? Councillor Russell?
I have a question.
By all means.
I'm hearing legal advice. I'm not aware of any legal advice that's been given to council with respect to any of this. Am I missing something? Have I not received the communique?
Don't think so, but Ms Ampremo?
No, council have not been provided with legal advice on this.
Thank you, Ms Ampremo. Councillors, is there anyone who would like to speak against the revocation? No? Is there anyone else who would like to speak in favour? Councillor Prendeville.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just really quickly, like others have mentioned, I just wanted to reinforce that it is the role of the CEO to determine if a risk assessment is required, and this psychosocial risk assessment has been requested, and as we have read recently, will be actioned either way by our acting CEO, and I'm very grateful for this. We need to remind ourselves to be very careful not to overstep, to remind ourselves of our roles. This assessment is separate and different to any report from our monitor. We are all acutely aware that there are some serious concerns, concerns about workplace culture, wellbeing, psychosocial safety, mental health. We have staff on stress leave, and we have a responsibility to ensure a safe and respectful workplace and to act in the best interests of our organisation and our city. I take mental health very seriously. It's definitely an issue close to my heart, and psychosocial risks have been identified here, and I will not take any action that will stand in the way of proper assessment and timely assessment. This revocation is about reconfirming our roles, responsibilities, boundaries. These are all clearly laid out for us, and I hope the revocation passes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Prendeville. Councillors, is there anyone who would like to speak against the revocation? Is there anyone else who would like to speak in favour of the revocation? Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I am speaking in favour of this revocation, not for the same reasons that Councillor Howelling expressed this evening. I'm agreeing with the outcome, and I think it's appropriate that we do achieve a revocation tonight. I do take into consideration the comments and concerns raised by Councillor Raison, and I think achieving a revocation does move us forward and puts us in the right position, and also allows the acting CEO to proceed and to undertake an appropriate review that is actually required. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Councillors, is there anyone who would like to speak either for or against the revocation who hasn't already spoken? I'll say a few very, very brief words. I'm content for the revocation to go ahead. I had concerns this time last week. I'm not sure I agree with everything that the mover and the seconder have had to say, but I'll be guided by advice that is obtained or provided by the city administration. I would very much like to see, irrespective of what the acting CEO may do, I would very much like to see this issue taken to the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee, but I'll save those comments for when we're talking about the substitute motion. But I am prepared to allow the revocation go through in this instance. Would anyone else like to speak either for or against? No. Councillor Howling, if you wish to rebut any arguments made during debate, you have an opportunity now.
Thank you. I should start by just pointing out that there was an error in the covering report which found its way into the council's report, It said on the 25th of March, the Monitor informed. Obviously, that was after the council meeting of the 24th of March. And I think
Councillor Howling,
there was a question
I
asked.
appreciate you trying to help, but we've moved to the point where you're rebutting arguments made during debate.
Thank you. Can I say this, that firstly, the reading of legislation and what it requires, and having an understanding and an appreciation for legislation and what it requires, as well as governance and our role, is fundamental to the task. It's a requirement of the role of council to govern the local government's affairs as required by clause 2.7, and it must do so consistent with the requirements of the Acts of Parliament. And that is that it must look at what's contained in legislation. And Section 5 of the Work Health and Safety Act, which I have no doubt that everybody will have availed themselves of, makes very clear what a PCBU, who it is, and that in subclause 5, a local government member does not conduct a business or an undertaking. If you're not satisfied with that, or if you're not satisfied with what I've said,
Councillor Howling, I'm sorry to interrupt, but nobody actually advanced that argument against the motion for the revocation. You only get to rebut arguments that were actually made by people speaking against the revocation.
With respect, I don't agree. I'm rebutting the argument.
Yes, but I'm the presiding member, Councillor Howling, so please keep it to the arguments that were made during debate.
I certainly will, Mr Mayor. The legislation, for that reason, in answer to what Councillor Razon says, that there's no legal advice and for that reason we're really unable to determine what it is without reliance on an individual member, you don't need to rely on me. You can rely on the legislation. You can rely also on what's contained in the comments within the report. And the comments within the report makes clear who that role, where that role exists and who has the responsibility for it. So you don't have to rely on what I'm saying. You can rely on what's in the Act of Parliament, you can rely on what's contained in the Local Government Act, and you can look at the comments within the report to come to a conclusion that there is no ability to have done what we did. In other words, it is not consistent with what's in the Work Health and Safety Act, it's not consistent with the Local Government Act, and therefore it's not a question of legal advice, it's just a question of whether or not we had the power to do it in any event, and we didn't. So for that reason, I do ask that we have a unanimous resolution to overturn this decision by revocation. It's not premature, with the greatest of respect, to carry out a review. I've referred to only a few things which are known and which the community made representations about. It doesn't matter whether or not the PCBU carried out consultation with the Monitor or took advice from the Monitor or engaged with any other person. The person, as I discussed this afternoon with the Acting Chief Executive Officer, who will be eating porridge if something goes wrong within this organisation, is the PCBU. And that means they have a heavy responsibility and they have a requirement to make sure that they apply and properly turn their mind to what's going on in the organisation. I appreciate the fact that Councillor Brenda Brandis doesn't agree with my view, but I'm grateful for his stated opinion that he wants to move forward to a right decision. And for that reason, I say that the right decision is a resolution. And I ask that all of Council join together for a unanimous resolution to support this urgent business that we've put before Council tonight. And we did so to give support to ensure that the Acting Chief Executive Officer feels supported in the role that she needs to undertake in doing the work that is necessary for the PCUB. So I ask for your support, and I'm grateful for everybody coming here tonight. I'm mindful of the fact that this is an important matter, and I'm grateful for your comments made thus far. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Howling. So, councillors, I'm about to put the vote on the revocation to the vote. We're purely voting on the revocation for the time being. The revocation needs an absolute majority. If it's successful, then I will invite Councillor Howling to move his substitute motion. So hopefully that's clear. We're voting on the revocation only right now. Councillors, please cast your votes. All right, just waiting on one more vote. Governance, who are we waiting on? Councillor Lees. Thank you. All right, so the votes are in. The revocation has been carried 8 votes to 1. Those in favour were Councillor Brenda Brandis, Councillor D'Souza, Councillor Howling, Councillor Lees, Mayor Milner, Councillor Prendeville, Councillor Russell and Councillor Wall. Those against were Councillor Raison. So the revocation has been passed. Council decision 326/061 that was passed at item 14 of last week's ordinary council meeting has now been revoked. I will now invite Councillor Howling to move his substitute motion, which if we can get up on the screen there, thank you. Councillor Howling, would you like to move your substitute motion?
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
All right, if you can read the text and then I'll see about a seconder, please.
The second part to the motion as circulated was further that Council resolves to 1. Accept that the matters raised and within its knowledge are of sufficient seriousness to warrant independent consideration. 2. Request the Acting Chief Executive Officer to progress the report on the psychosocial effects on the local government by Azure. I should pause. I wish to indicate that I am going to amend every time it's reading Azure within the motion to a suitably qualified expert. It's an amendment that I intend to make as I'm reading along. I've discussed this with the Chief Executive Officer this afternoon. And obtain and present to Council as soon as practicable a report in respect to the intra-council work environment, how elected members function together, the council leadership work environment, interactions between elected members and the city leaders, and the council and administration work environment, interactions between elected members and non-leadership employees in council-facing roles. 3. Ensure that any such review is progressed with urgency, with an interim report on progress to be provided within 28 days. 4. Ensure that no officer or council member interfere with the independence of the consultant or the terms of reference and instructions, and that the consultant do make a declaration to the effect. That no council member at any time contact or speak to the consultant except at the request, it should be except, not at the request of the consultant for the purpose of undertaking the report, and only if asked by the consultant. And 6, that the Acting Chief Executive Officer do instruct a suitably qualified expert in writing, and that all communications with the consultant be appended to any report. And 7, that the report be presented to Council and identify any proposed response to any action items identified by the suitably qualified expert.
Thank you, Councillor Howling. I'll see about a seconder. Councillors, would anyone like to second Councillor Howling's substitute motion? Councillor D'Souza. Councillor Howling, the floor is yours.
Thank you. This part of the proposal goes into the way within which that report ought properly to be commissioned. It ought to be a report that considers that there are matters of sufficient seriousness. Now, there are not matters that I wish to raise unless pressed, and I will do so if necessary in closing. In respect of what we know as council members that warrant the need for a report such as that which is being suggested and put forward. That is, that an independent expert undertake the work on a psychosocial analysis of the way within which the councillors work together, the council and the leadership work together, and the council and administration work together. And that is to identify those matters, of course, that may be going well, those matters that need improvement, and the way within which we're able to effect improvements in that respect. Additionally, that we ensure that any review is progressed with necessary urgency, and that is that we receive at least some form of an update as to what is precisely going on within 28 days, so that we know how matters are being progressed. Additionally, the other item, that is fourth, that we at least are receiving a report which is the independent result of work that is being undertaken by the consultant. Not that there is any interference with their work, that they're able to do that independently and that they make a declaration to that effect. Anybody who's read any report of a nature that is useful will know that it always is accompanied by a declaration as to its independence. That is not only important, it's the way within which we can all have assurances that the product and outcome of any report is not going to be the subject of any attack as to its tendentious nature, or that it's considered to be written for a particular purpose and outcome. And for that reason, that nobody should interfere with that consultant's report or the way within which that consultant is undertaking the report, and additionally that anything that is being given to that consultant by way of instructions be done in writing, and that those, which is also a usual approach, that those instructions are appended to the report. All of these things are ordinary, helpful, useful, and will ensure that whatever report that we receive will enable us to carry out our business better. I am expressly reserving the questions of the seriousness to warrant the independent consideration. There are serious issues. They do need attention. We do need a report. Now, I will shortly, and if you think that, well, we're going to automatically go to an alternate recommendation being put, raise issues in respect of an alternate recommendation being put at this particular meeting, I reserve my position in that respect. I've raised this this afternoon. It is a motion that's been put for which a special meeting's been called with a requisite notice being given. This is just ancillary to the work that we are doing. And what does it do? And where does this come from? It comes firstly from ensuring and giving the community the knowledge that what we're doing is properly independent. We sought to direct the Chief Executive Officer in respect of this item of work. We've overturned it, and I thank you. But now the council, now the members of the community need to know that the work that we are going to do and the outcomes of that work is a truly independent piece of work, that nobody will again interfere or seek to interfere with operational matters. And for that reason, I ask you to support this part of the motion as well, to ensure that the work that we get is properly based, independent, carefully considered, and a product of the experts' own views, which they attest to, and therefore accompany with all of the written communication in respect of it. I so move, those are the basis of why I have put this further amendments to this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howling. I may have misinterpreted you, but just so that everyone's on the same page, I do need to be clear that you don't get to speak twice in debate. You will get an opportunity to wind up at the conclusion of the debate on this item, but you have spoken once. You can't speak again on the things that you say that you're... Okay, good. All right. Councillor D'Souza, you are the seconder. Would you like to speak?
I would. Thank you, Mr Mayor. So this psychosocial hazard risk assessment is going to progress regardless of what the outcome of this or subsequent votes are. And we have been advised as such from the acting CEO via email on Friday. And I'm grateful for that advice, because this really then reduces the substantive of this motion to the process by which we undertake this risk assessment. I have full faith that Ms Amprimo can conduct this process without the guardrails or perceived limitations of the reporting to ARI committee or further workshops. I think we need to be very clear that this is done at absolute arm's length from any member of council. I think that's the only way we can proceed past the quagmire we find ourselves in. It's incumbent on all of us to take the temperature down, and I'm grateful this piece of work is proceeding. I thank the advice from the acting CEO that this will be proceeding regardless of whatever votes council takes, but I do think it's important to not limit this process via reporting or workshops or any extraneous considerations. I think the acting CEO should be free to conduct this process as she sees fit. And I think the removal of Azure as the consultant further empowers the acting CEO to make that choice. And I think that is the best possible way we move forward from this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor D'Souza. Councillors, would someone like to speak against Councillor Howling's substitute motion? Councillor Russell, I see your microphone on there.
A question, please.
By all means.
I'm referring to point 3, which says, ensure that any such review is progressed with urgency, with an interim report on progress to be provided within 28 days. So the question is, by placing a schedule limitation on an operational document or an operational matter, is that in itself operational?
Ms Amprimo.
Thank you for the question. So I read that as saying that council wants a report back within 28 days on the progress at that point in time. That progress could, for example, be that we have appointed a consultant and they have given us this time frame. I don't believe that that puts any other constraints on me other than to report back to council where I'm at 28 days.
Thank you, Ms Amprimo. Councillors, does anyone wish to speak against Councillor Howling's substitute motion? Councillor Lees?
I have a question as well, thank you.
By all means.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. What progress are you likely to have made within 21 days? And providing a report takes up administration time, so I'm just wondering if it's appropriate to have a time frame on that.
Ms Amprimo?
Perhaps if the wording were changed to provide interim advice on progress, if the elected member is agreeable to that, I could do that by way of email, and then because I wouldn't intend that anybody wants to come back for a special council meeting to have an update. So yeah, perhaps if it was rather than an interim report provides advice to elected members, I could do that by way of email.
Councillor Howling?
Content with that.
Councillor D'Souza?
Happy with that, Mr Mayor.
All right. Councillor Lees?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've got a further question. In relation to point 4 that talks about no officer, council member impact, interfere with the independence of the consultant or the terms of reference and instructions, and that the consultant do make a declaration to that effect. Is that something, I am assuming, would be undertaking or requiring the consultant to undertake the assessment in due process, and is that something that the council should be getting involved in, or is that in an administrative manner?
Ms Amprimo?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. So ordinarily a consultant would make a comment in the report to say that the advice is independent anyway. So we would expect them to do that. I think this proposed council resolution is purely clarifying that the expectation that is contained within the report.
Thank you, Ms Amprimo. Councillor Lees?
So just to clarify, as PCBU, that would be something that the acting CEO could potentially do in any case. You would be putting restrictions on involvement, I would assume.
Ms Amprimo?
I would expect the consultant to undertake the report independently, regardless, yes.
Thank you. Councillors, would anyone like to speak against the Councillor Howling's substitute motion? Councillor Brenda Brown, a question or speaking?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Question for the administration.
Fire away.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just understanding the amendment to this proposed motion before us tonight in removing Azure as the consultant, can the administration please advise if the removal of Azure is with regard to the process undertaken, or was there no engagement, or did the administration maybe have a view that Azure would not be the appropriate consultant for this undertaking?
Ms Amprema?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. So there currently is no contract with Azure, and we have to go through a procurement process to engage a consultant. So we don't consider it would be appropriate for council to actually stipulate which provider we would use until we've gone through that procurement process.
Thank you, Ms Amprema. Councillors, I might speak. I'm speaking against Councillor Howling's substitute motion, and I will foreshadow my own one. Councillors, they say that a lot can change in a week, and it's probably fair to say that a lot has changed in the week since the March Ordinary Council meeting. We now have new information that we weren't in receipt of last Tuesday. And that information is, I think, very relevant to the decision that we now have before us. We know, for example, that Acting CEO Anita Ampremo has contacted Azure. We know that Azure has declined to provide Ms Ampremo with information on any communications with the city previously, but they have confirmed that Azure has not been contracted to undertake any services for the city. We know that Acting CEO Anita Ampremo has instructed staff to commence the relevant process to engage a consultant to undertake an appropriately scoped psychosocial risk hazard assessment to meet the obligations of the PCBU. And those are the key words, at least with respect to what I'm going to lay out, is appropriately scoped. We've revoked Council's decision made at the item 14 of last week's Ordinary Council meeting, okay, and I'm willing to accept that, but like I said before, I still very much would like to see the city's Audit Risk and Improvement Committee involved in any consideration of psychosocial risks to the city and its people without limiting the powers of Ms Ampremo to undertake what may be necessary in the interim. So, why am I not supporting Councillor Howling's substantive substitute motion? The first reason is I still have concerns about any psychosocial risk assessment that only focuses on elected members and which expressly does not consider interactions between staff members. And if we were to accept Councillor Howling's substitute motion, we would be bound to those three elements that were contained in CEO Liz Ledger's email to us from Monday. I would have thought, and this is not to bind Ms Ampremo, but personally, I would have thought that a more holistic psychosocial risk assessment would be more appropriate and frankly far more useful for the city as a whole. This is especially relevant given that interactions between city staff and elected members have been quite limited since December of last year, relatively speaking, and particularly since Ms McGowan was appointed monitor in February. So that's the first reason. I don't think we should be limiting ourselves to a scope of only interactions involving elected members. My second reason for not supporting Councillor Howling's substitute motion is that Councillor Howling's motion requires that, open quote, no officer or council member affect, impact, interfere with the independence of the consultant or the terms of reference and instructions, close quote. So here's the relevant parts, folks. No officer or council member can affect, impact or interfere with the terms of reference and instructions. What does that mean in practice? I think those words create a bit of a practical problem. Azure has confirmed that Azure has not been contracted to undertake any services for the city, but has otherwise declined to provide information on any previous communications with the city. Carrying Councillor Howling's substituted motion would therefore, at least in my view, put Ms Amprimo in a rather difficult situation. What exactly would the instructions to the consultant be, and what could Ms Amprimo realistically do if any clarification was required? Wouldn't any clarification of instructions necessarily, open quote, affect, impact, or interfere with, close quote, the terms of reference and instructions? I think they necessarily would. So if we were to carry Councillor Howling's substituted motion, wouldn't that necessarily paint Ms Amprimo into a bit of a corner and restrict Ms Amprimo's ability to address psychosocial risk? Isn't that at least part of the reason that was given for the revocation of the original motion? That's 5 minutes. I've got to interrupt myself. Would someone be kind enough to yes, thank you, Councillor Brenda Abrandis, and seconded by Councillor Lees. Councillors, if you'd please vote on a motion that I be granted a further 5 minutes. And that was unanimous. Thank you, councillors, for the indulgence. I'll try not to take all of it. Now, I'm pretty sure I heard an argument earlier, maybe I misheard it, but I thought I heard an argument earlier that council shouldn't be putting restraints on a CEO's ability, or in this case, an acting CEO's ability, to put in place the measures she sees fit. Councillor De Souza said that the acting CEO shouldn't be subjected to guardrails and that we shouldn't limit the process. Okay, but perhaps unintentionally, Councillor Howling's substituted motion does in fact impose guardrails and limits the process. It commits us to a vague and uncertain terms of reference, and I think restricts the ability of Ms Amprimo to clarify or change that terms of reference. So that's my second reason why I can't support Councillor Howling's substituted motion. My third reason is that Ms Amprimo has already instructed staff to commence the relevant process to engage a consultant to undertake an appropriately scoped psychosocial hazard risk assessment to meet the obligations of the PCBU, and she's advised us accordingly. I have had the opportunity now to consider the officer comment at page 8 of tonight's agenda, and I'm satisfied with the advice provided. For these reasons, I have prepared and distributed an alternative motion that hopefully everyone's had a chance to consider, and I am foreshadowing that motion in the event that Councillor Howling's substituted motion is not carried. That alternative motion, you've got the exact words in front of you, but to summarise, it did provide for the revocation of the previous council decision. We've done that. It notes that the acting Chief Executive Officer is already undertaking a psychosocial risk assessment in accordance with the city's responsibilities as a PCBU. It also requests the acting Chief Executive Officer to report back to council on the findings of the psychosocial risk assessment. It doesn't set a rigid timeframe for doing so because, to be honest, I don't know how long that's going to take or how long would be a reasonable period of time. And then it further requests the acting Chief Executive Officer to consider adding the issue of psychosocial risk to the agenda for the next Audit Risk and Improvement Committee, and also asks the acting CEO to consider whether we ought to have a special meeting of the Audit Risk and Improvement Committee before 16 June 2026. So, councillors, I've tried to strike the appropriate balance between considering the issue of psychosocial risk through an appropriate forum such as the city's Audit Risk and Improvement Committee, whilst simultaneously allowing our acting Chief Executive Officer and giving her the freedom to implement an appropriately scoped psychosocial hazard risk assessment in the meantime to meet the city's obligations as the PCBU. And that at least to me, seems to be the best way forwards. I will be voting against the motion presently before us, and if that motion does not succeed, I will then move that, I'm going to use the word alternative, but different, foreshadowed motion. If for whatever reason Councillor Howling's substituted motion is not carried, I hope you will support me in that endeavour. That's all I have to say. Is there anyone who would like to speak in favour of Councillor Howling's substitute motion? Councillor Waugh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wasn't going to, but in light of your comments, I think that I should. And I just wanted to say, for the benefit of some people who haven't been on the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee for some time, some 2 years ago, I attempted to bring workplace relations into the terms of reference for the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee. And at that time, it was not accepted. I was informed at that time that it was sort of largely financial and policy based, and I've just had a look right now at the terms of reference for that committee, which relates to financial reporting, internal control structure, corporate business planning, policies, delegations, risk management systems, external audit functions and ethical accountability, and functions in relation to audits, and to present to Council on findings and recommendations. So fast forward, now we find ourselves in the curious position looking to put forward workplace relations items into the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee, which I don't think it's appropriately got the terms of reference to cover. And I have to note that that particular committee has recently made a media presence for not releasing the audio recording of that. So I am concerned as to the transparency of that committee. In terms of where we are right now, the city, I'm aware, over the last couple of years, has had some of the highest rates of complaints amongst local governments. And I know that there's been a lot of discussion that that's the process we should be undertaking. However, I think that in itself is demonstrative that there is a problem. I also note that we've actually had a fairly high turnover of CEOs. I think we've had about 5 in the last year or so, is that right? And granted, some of them were temporary. But we have had a number of staff changes as well. So look, all of these things are, in my view, bringing us to the point where we are now. The motion before us, and I understand the criticism in relation to no officer or council member is to interfere with the process. That doesn't mean to say that they're not permitted to set them. So I appreciate that the CEO and the officers are by all means permitted to set the terms of reference as they would need to do in order to engage somebody. But once that process is set and once it's in motion, it absolutely should not be interfered with by any person whatsoever. And I 100% agree with it. So, yeah, sorry, I just had to say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waugh. Councillors, is there anyone else who would like to speak against Councillor Howling's substitute motion? Councillor Lees.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I have a few difficulties with the motion in front of us. Firstly, from my reading, it requires the acting CEO to stick with the scope set by the CEO. Based on the advice we've now received, setting the scope is the acting CEO's responsibility as the current PBCU. It's appropriate that she's the one who decides what assessments should cover and makes sure it meets workplace health and safety requirements. My concern last week and still today is that if the city is going to undertake this assessment, it has to look at the whole picture, the council, the CEO and the staff. This is ratepayer money we're talking about, and we owe it to the staff and our community to make sure the work is done once and done properly. If we don't have a comprehensive assessment and a full understanding of the risk to all workers, we're at real risk of dealing with issues in isolation and leaving others unresolved. We need to complete the picture, and to my mind, anything less wouldn't be good governance and it wouldn't meet with her work, health and safety obligations. I hope the acting CEO takes that into account when she's finalising the scope. I was concerned about the locking in of Azure, but I acknowledge that's now been changed. And I note that any procurement has to follow the policy P605 for purchasing. Matters 4, 5 and 6 in the motion strike me as being procedural matters. These are matters to be dealt with by the acting CEO as the PCBU. And to quote an often repeated line, we need to stay in our lane on this matter. So that sort of detail in this motion I do not support. So for those reasons I won't be supporting this motion before us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lees. Councillors, is there someone who would like to speak in favour of Councillor Howling's substituted motion? No? Is there anyone else who would like to speak against? Councillor Russell?
Just another question, thank you. So,
Please proceed.
point 2, where it seeks to restrict the scope of work to those points A, B and C. So again, in terms of an operational matter, is the restriction of the scope in itself operational in itself?
Ms Amprima?
The wording as it stands says that I have to report back to council as soon as practical or with respect to those 3 items. My interpretation of that is that that doesn't mean to say that I can't, for the purpose of the PCBU, have additional scope that I don't report back to council.
Thank you, Ms Amprima. Councillor Russell?
So following on from that, am I to assume then that the city will be expanding this scope?
Ms Amprima?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So the city will be using the code of practice to guide the work, because that is the best way to approach complying with legislation when it comes to workplace health and safety. So the scope will be guided by the code of practice.
Thank you, Ms Amprima. Councillors, would anyone like to speak either for or against Councillor Howling's substituted motion? Councillor Councillor Brenda Abrandis, and if you can let us know if you're speaking for or against.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm speaking against this motion. So firstly, paragraph 2 is very restrictive. It has a focus on intra-council work environment, council leadership work environment and council administration work environment. As Councillor Lees has indicated, if we are going to be taking the matter seriously, and if it is as serious a risk as we are aware, then we should be considering everything and not be restricting the acting CEO. Paragraph 3 talks about certain limitations with regard to the acting CEO required to conduct the review with urgency and provide the report within 28 days. Now, again, if this is such a serious matter, it is urgent, and it goes without saying that the acting CEO would undertake this with the utmost urgency. With regard to the provision of a report within a period of time, again, the acting CEO would use her best judgment as to when to provide that, and no doubt an urgent matter would be reported back urgently. This motion does not consider the fact that we have an Audit Risk Committee, and the Audit Risk Committee is there for a purpose. It raises risks to the elected members so that we could actually consider, assess and understand the action that is required. It's highly appropriate that such a serious matter is actually brought into the risk management function, and it does form part of our risk review, and it is actually reported back. But again, the foreshadowed motion leaves this to the acting CEO to consider. And I think it's an important aspect that consideration should be given to the reporting of such serious matters through the Audit Risk Committee. It's not mandated. Paragraphs 4, 5 and 6, I don't consider appropriate to be instructing the CEO. These matters should go without saying, and if we find that councillors are impacting, interfering, impeding, or speaking to consultants when they're not entitled to, this is actually inappropriate behaviour, and that is a different matter. I don't see the need to be articulating paragraphs 4, 5 and 6. I think that is not allowing the acting CEO to see as she does fit. I think we need to remove the restrictions. I think we need to increase the scope if it is warranted, but this motion does not allow that. And I think we do need to offer the acting CEO the opportunity to consider whether that this is appropriately raised at the Audit Risk Committee. For these reasons tonight, I will not be supporting this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Councillors, is there anyone who would like to speak either for or against Councillor Howling's substituted motion who hasn't already spoken? Councillor Raison, and if you could let us know if you're speaking for or against.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I wasn't planning to speak in relation to this motion, actually, and I think that's probably fairly self-explanatory. But I just thought for everybody's benefit, I'd share a different perspective to the one expressed by Councillor Waugh about the scope of the Audit and Risk and Improvement Committee. But firstly, under our risk management framework, the city uses the 3 lines governance model, but that model only works to properly cover risks when all 3 lines coordinate, collaborate and communicate. Even when an urgent risk arises, our governance processes are designed to be flexible enough for a proactive, comprehensive response to be developed across all 3 lines. Our Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee is a key part of the 3rd line of governance. It is responsible, and this is stated in the framework, for ensuring that the administration has a robust, structured process for identifying, which could also include assessing, and managing organisational risks, including workplace health and safety risks. And I think it is quite important for us to go back to what these objectives are, because I would be very concerned, as Councillor Waugh has quite rightly raised, if work health and safety was not within the remit of audit and risk. And so I'll share my perspective on that, that under the objectives, in my, it's only my opinion, I think that when it says the objective of the committee is to facilitate effective management of financial and other risks, then in my opinion, workplace health and safety would be included in that scope of those risks. I also just understand Councillor De Souza's concern about limiting the CEO's powers. So I would also just want to clarify that the powers of audit and risk expressly say the following. The Audit and Risk Committee does not have executive powers or authority to implement actions in areas over which the CEO has legislative responsibility and does not have any delegated financial responsibility. So for me, I'm comfortable in that regard that that committee doesn't have the ability to overlap with what the CEO will propose to do. So that's why I'm speaking against.
Thank you, Councillor Raison. Councillors, is there anyone who would like to speak either for or against Councillor Howling's substituted motion who has not already spoken? No. Councillor Howling, you have 5 minutes to rebut any arguments made during debate if you would like to do so.
Thank you. A report that gets initiated and is presented to Council should not be presented to the Audit, Governance and Risk meeting. It ought to be open, it ought to be accountable and it ought to be transparent about what's going on within the organisation. I looked at the 23-24 numbers of complaints in respect of South Perth on the standard panel annual report. It showed 66 complaints in respect of this local government. A similar local government of a similar size, perhaps Bayswater, 5. Now, I don't think that that trajectory, which had been shown a few years ago, has stopped. What that indicates to me, as Councillor Waugh had pointed out, that there is an internal issue. And if the numbers of complaints are some form of a guide that there may well be interpersonal interactions which are indicating that the working relationship is between councillors is at a premium, the annual report of the Standards Panel seems to indicate that it does. For that reason, I don't think that we should hide it through the Governance and Audit Committee. We should keep it transparent. It's not a direction. And we discussed tonight, the proposal is not a direction to the Chief Executive Officer. We discussed this part of the proposal tonight as if it's entirely independent of what's just happened. What's just happened is we indicated to the Chief Executive Officer that we will issue a direction to her, albeit unlawful, to not undertake a particular study. What we need to do is indicate to the Acting Chief Executive Officer that we support the study that was proposed, that we support looking at ourselves, that we say to the Acting Chief Executive Officer, we want this. We shouldn't leave an Acting Chief Executive Officer out to dry as if they can't, as if they may have some timidity. But number 2 doesn't say they have to. Number 2 says request the Acting Chief Executive Officer to progress the report on psychosocial effects on local government by an independent expert and obtain and present it to the Council as soon as practicable in respect of the internal matters which have plagued this Council for at least the last 6 years and that we have to take responsibility for and that we have to move ahead with. We have to identify those issues, we have to work out how to fix those up, and we need to ensure that we do so that we don't go through 5 Chief Executive Officers, so that we provide safety for our administrative officers, so that we ensure that they aren't affected by what we do as a council and how we interact with them. I had thought that the distinctions between operational and council matters would make it clear after the City of Perth inquiry that there would not be interference with the operational matters. But I regret to find that that is not the position. This motion gives the assurance to the Acting Chief Executive Officer that we are asking her expressly for a report to look into how you, me, interact and work together with the administration. This is not just optional, this is mandatory. It's not just a matter of saying, oh well, Acting Chief Executive Officer, we know you're here for a short period. We're going to leave it to you whether you choose to have us reviewed. I tell you, the way that this council has acted, I would be scared to do exactly that if I was in the shoes of the Acting Chief Executive Officer. And for that reason, the proposal in the 3 dot points in number 2 to request that these things be undertaken is not unusual, and we should not hide it. What we're saying is that our motion was unlawful and we want to give you support, Chief Executive Officer. We want this to be undertaken, Acting Chief Executive Officer. We want this to be done because it's good for us. Because once we've done it, we can sort out the issues that have plagued this council for longer than just the last year. We can work out how to move forward in a way within which we are able to ensure that we work together and collectively for the interests of the ratepayers. And to suggest that term 4 meant that there would be no ability for the Chief Executive Officer or the Acting Chief Executive Officer even to instruct is not the point, but it's to ensure that council members don't become involved in the operational matters. Think what just happened. This is not an independent, almost standalone motion as if it's just dropped out of thin air. It's come onto our table because of what we've just done. And we're all responsible.
Councillor Howling, that is 5 minutes and I've got no ability to extend that time. Councillors, I'm going to put Councillor Howling's substitute motion to the vote. If that succeeds, it succeeds. If it doesn't succeed, then, as you know, I've foreshadowed my own motion. So, councillors, with that, please cast your votes on Councillor Howling's substitute motion. All right, the votes are in. The Councillor Howling's substituted motion has failed, 4 votes to 5. Those who voted in favour were Councillor Sousa, Councillor Howling, Councillor Prendeville and Councillor Waugh. Those who voted against were Councillor Brenda Abrandis, Councillor Lees, Mayor Milner, Councillor Raison and Councillor Russell. Okay, so during debate, I foreshadowed that I would move my own foreshadowed motion. We should have that up on the screen fairly shortly. But just, I suppose, for the form of it, I'll read what the motion says. My motion reads as follows, paragraph 1, that Council notes that the Acting Chief Executive Officer is undertaking a psychosocial risk assessment in accordance with the City's responsibility as the person conducting a business or undertaking, PCBU. Paragraph 2 says that Council requests the Acting Chief Executive Officer report back to Council on the findings of the psychosocial risk assessment. Paragraph 3 says that Council requests the Acting Chief Executive Officer to consider, paragraph A, whether the issue of psychosocial risk should be added to the agenda for the next Audit Risk and Improvement Committee meeting. And paragraph B, whether a special meeting of the Audit Risk and Improvement Committee should be convened prior to 16 June 2026 and advise Council of the outcome. Was anyone willing to second that motion? Councillor Brenda Abrandis, thank you. Councillors, I won't speak for long. You've already heard my reasons as to why I'm moving this motion. I will take a little bit of time just to correct what I think may have been a couple of misunderstandings said during debate. Councillor Howling referred to the 2023/24 Local Government Standards Panel Annual Report. I think there may have been a confusion between allegations and complaints, but what I can say is I've got the 2024/25 Local Government Standards Panel Annual Report in front of us, and I can see in that report that there was a grand total of 1 complaint at the City of South Perth, which spanned 3 allegations. So I'm not sure that the figures that Councillor Howling were referring to were, well, either quite correct or if they were, they certainly weren't representative. I also echo what Councillor Raison had to say about the terms of reference for the Audit Risk and Improvement Committee. As councillors know, we did adopt a new terms of reference for the Audit Risk and Improvement Committee in December 2025. Clause 2, the objectives include facilitating effective management of financial and other risks, advising Council in relation to all audit, risk management and compliance matters. I'm doing this on the fly, so I might have missed something. Paragraph 4, areas of responsibility includes, bear with me, review the City's corporate business plan, policies, delegations and risk management systems. It includes reviewing the internal control structure, monitoring the operations of the information system and internal controls, and providing recommendations for improvements, and reviewing the quarterly activity report, which incorporates risk management, business continuity, and perhaps most relevantly, workplace health and safety. I think there's also a reference in here to making sure that we comply, advising and complying with all relevant laws. But, oh yes, sorry, it was in clause 2, ensure compliance with laws and regulations. So, at least on my reading, folks, I think that the Audit Risk and Improvement Committee absolutely does have jurisdiction to consider these matters, but the intention of this motion is not to solely confine what this city and what our Acting Chief Executive Officer might be able to do solely to the Audit Risk and Improvement Committee. It's intended to be something in addition to the other steps that Acting Chief Executive Anita Imprimo might choose to do to ensure that the city complies with its obligations under the workplace health and safety laws. So, that's me. I won't go any further than that. I think people have got the point. Councillor Brenda Abrandis, you're the seconder. Would you like to speak?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, I'll keep it short as well, as my comments previously made still stand. In summary, I support this because it actually does allow the acting CEO more flexibility, and it also does take into consideration the possibility of a broader review if that is required. And finally, it does give the opportunity for consideration as to whether this matter is a Audit, Risk and Improvements Committee matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Councillors, does anyone wish to speak against my substituted motion? Councillor Howling?
Thank you. Yes, I do. Firstly, this afternoon I've had a number of discussions with the Governance Officer and the Chief Executive Officer. The requirements, at least under the standing orders, is that motions can only be made, an amendment motion as it's put before us, or any motion, to an officer's recommendation. That's clause 10.1A(1). And secondly, that any motion of this nature, in effect, needs to only comply with those matters which are properly before the meeting at the present time, Standing Order 5.1 and then 2, which says no business is to be transacted at a special meeting of the council other than that given notice as the purpose of the meeting. Now, arguably, the purpose of the meeting could be argued to suggest that it is the rescission itself and those matters which are obviously appursuant to that rescission motion, and for that reason the previous motion was consistent with that. The problem with the motion that we've got at the moment is it doesn't adhere to the requirements of the standing orders. Now, I don't need that to be responded to by Mr Morgan just at the moment, because I don't want to place him necessarily on the spot, but I will come to him later. The substantive reason why I speak against this motion is that it thins out what it is that we ought to be supporting, to be undertaking. We ought not to be in any way indicating to the Acting Chief Executive Officer anything other than absolute support for the undertaking of the work that is to be done. And I spoke a moment ago as to the reasons for why I thought that the Council needed to show to the Acting Chief Executive Officer why we supported her to review us. But what I have a difficulty with is, in effect, pressing this matter off to the Audit, Governance and Risk meeting, or Improvement Committee meeting. This ought properly to stay with Council. We ought to receive a report from Council. Now, I haven't heard a single reason for why it needs to go to the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee. I suspect that it's so that other matters, or the matters, are able to then be dealt with behind closed doors. I would rather that the matter such as this nature be put back to the Council, that we discuss it at a Council meeting, and that we identify openly with our community what we can do to improve and fix up the sorts of issues that particularly affect the way within which we go about the business of interacting, in particular, with the members and the senior members of staff. It's not good enough to simply put it to the Audit, Governance and Risk, broaden out the scope a little bit, and then find ourselves in a position where we're just getting an all-in general report to be considered by that particular committee at a future point in time, without giving it some guardrails, at least in terms of when it comes back with some degree of urgency, that we have the opportunity to consider it in open Council meeting and not behind closed doors, which Audit, Risk and Improvement Committees often do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howling. I'm just going to ask a very, very simple question. Ms Amprimo, am I correct in understanding that any matters that come to Council from the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee get considered by the Council and can be debated by Council should they so choose?
Anything that comes through Audit, Risk and Improvement would come to Council, yes.
Thank you very much. Councillors, is there anyone else who would like... Councillor Russell, I see your lights on there.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Actually, my question is going to be a bit more specific to that. So any matter that comes before Council that is, or comes before the Audit, Risk and Governance committee, which is confidential, will also be confidential at an OCM. Is that correct?
Ms Amprema?
So what happens is the minutes from audit risk and improvement come to council, and if there's any decisions required out of audit risk and improvements consideration, then council then make that decision if there's a decision relating to it. So I would, without having the specifics, I would expect that if something is confidential to audit risk and improvement, then it would be considered confidential by council, but we would have to consider that under the relevant section of the Act at the time.
Thank you, Ms Amprema. Councillors, would anyone like to speak in favour of my substituted motion? Councillor Russell.
Actually, another question, please.
Sure.
So it's been stated that the resolution that we've just rescinded was unlawful. Has the city received any legal advice to substantiate that?
Ms Amprema.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So the city's not sought any legal advice on that, given that it received a notice requesting rescission be considered the following day.
Thank you, Ms Amprema. Councillors, is there anyone who... Oh, Councillor Raison, my apologies.
A question, Mr Mayor, as I've just sort of been looking through this afternoon, just so that I can just be clear. It's not really an either or, is this right, in relation to this motion? It's item 2 says that the request is to report back to council, and that item 3 is for the CEO, acting CEO, to consider whether this risk should be added to the agenda. Not necessarily. Could you just clarify that, please?
Ms Amprema.
Yeah, so I read item 2 correct, that council, there is a requirement to report back to council on the matter, and item 3 is that the acting chief executive officer consider whether that should be added to the agenda and whether there's a requirement for a meeting prior to the scheduled June meeting, and advise council of the outcome of that consideration.
Thank you, Ms Amprema. Councillor Raison.
Just another question. So is there a procedural issue in relation to this? I just was quite confused by what was said before. We are proceeding, is that right, to consider this alternative motion? Is this correct?
Mr Hindle.
Yeah, I'd just like to reiterate what I said at the start of the meeting. It's not an alternative motion, it's a foreshadowed motion. I'm happy to explain what a foreshadowed motion is again, but it's not considered an alternative motion, and therefore the standing orders that I think Councillor Howling was referring to in his debate just then don't apply.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Hindle and Councillor Raison. Councillors, is there anyone who would like to speak in favour of my substituted motion? Councillor Les.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll just be very brief. To me, this alternative motion is very straightforward. It's consistent with the acting CEO's role as the PCBU, which is now very clear. It is not leaving the acting CEO out to dry. It is supporting her in undertaking the assessment, and it is requesting her to consider whether the matter should be presented to the Audit Risk and Improvement Committee. It is not requiring it to her to do it. So from that basis, I think it's entirely appropriate, and I will be supporting the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Les. Councillors, would anyone like to speak against my substitute motion? No? Is there anyone else who would like to speak in favour? Councillor Raison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. If anyone who works at or engages with our city has concerns about psychosocial hazards, it is imperative that they have the opportunity to raise their concerns, whatever those concerns may be, and whoever those concerns may relate to. I would hope that it would go without saying that as elected members, we include ourselves in that group. It is also essential that any concerns are investigated thoroughly in a manner that gives everyone confidence in the process and the outcome. To ensure good governance, it is important that any psychosocial workplace risks are handled in accordance with the governance model in our risk management framework. And given that this is such an important issue, I'd like to make a few comments about that. We're here to serve our community as efficiently and as effectively as possible. To serve our community successfully, we need to operate as a coherent whole, as in a whole. Successful coherence is achieved by regular and effective coordination, collaboration and communication. When we don't take a coherent approach, we diminish our efficiency and effectiveness, or putting it another way, we waste time and public resources. Council is here to govern the affairs of the city and is responsible for the performance of the city's functions. A key part of our role is to establish, maintain and improve strategic coherence. One element of strategic coherence is providing strategic direction to the CEO. Strategic direction can include a range of matters. Importantly, in relation to the matter before us, it includes dealing with strategic risks. The city's ability to maintain a safe and healthy workplace is a strategic risk. And as you would expect, this is reflected by the fact that this risk has been on the city's strategic risk register for many years. It is also an operational risk, and accordingly, it is on the city's operational risk register. So what happens when a risk arises that is both strategic and operational? The answer is coherence. Under our risk management framework, the city uses the 3 lines governance model, but that model only works to properly cover risks when all 3 lines coordinate, collaborate and communicate. Even when an urgent risk arises, our governance processes are designed to be flexible enough for a proactive, comprehensive response to be developed across all 3 lines. Our Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee is a key part of the 3rd line of governance. It's responsible for ensuring that the administration has a robust, structured process for identifying and managing organisational risks, including workplace health and safety. In addition to managing operational risks, the city monitors strategic risks, including workplace health and safety, through its strategic risk register. In my view, the sooner any issues relating to psychosocial hazards can be brought to the Audit and Risk Committee, the sooner that committee can perform its 3rd line risk management role. Importantly, given that this matter also relates to us, elected members, the committee has 2 external independent experts who can provide independent guidance and expertise. For example, in light of the proposed commissioning of a psychosocial hazard risk assessment, the committee may wish to consider whether the scope of the current 3-year internal audit plan should be revised so that Council can be provided with an independent report that considers risk controls processes relating to workplace health and safety, with a particular focus on psychosocial hazards. The point of audit and risk is actually to bring these issues to light and to elevate them to Council in a proactive way as soon as possible. And in terms of the timing of the next meeting of the Audit and Risk Committee, I appreciate we may also have the benefit of the Monitor's views on item 1.1e of the monitoring assignment, which also deals with work health and safety, and it would be appropriate for the timing of all these matters to be considered together in a holistic way. As a first step, it may be appropriate for the Mayor and the Acting CEO to meet with the Monitor to discuss the scope of this assessment and any overlap with the Monitor's terms of appointment.
Councillor Raison, that's 5 minutes, but I'll move a motion. You be granted a further... Oh, okay.
Happy
All right.
to stop there. Thank you.
Councillors, is there anyone else who would like to speak either for or against my substituted motion who hasn't already spoken? Councillor Prendeville.
Just a question, please, Mr Mayor.
Please proceed.
I know this has been asked before, but I just want final clarification. If this motion passes or fails, the Acting CEO is actioning a psychosocial risk assessment anyway.
Ms Emprema.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Councillors, would anyone else like to speak either for or against? No. In that case, I'll wind up. I'll keep it fairly short. I think Councillor Raison expressed the purpose of the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee very well, very succinctly and very eloquently. Thank you. I'm not sure I agree with any suggestions, if indeed any such suggestions were made, that the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee is a place to hide or bury issues. I would say that's absolutely not correct. That's a productive forum where we do look at risk issues, amongst other things, to ensure that they're dealt with appropriately and with the benefit of expert advice and according to proper processes. But in any event, just in case there is any confusion, I'm not suggesting that that is the only avenue by which the issue of psychosocial risk can be addressed or pursued. My motion is quite clear that we note that the Acting Chief Executive Officer is, in any event, undertaking a psychosocial risk assessment in accordance with the city's responsibility as the person conducting a business or undertaking, and expressly contemplates the Acting Chief Executive Officer reporting back to us the findings of that psychosocial risk assessment. So I'm not sure I understand any suggestions that it's a one or the other approach. Absolutely not. That's me. I'll now put my substitute motion to the vote. Councillors, please cast your votes. And the votes are in. My substitute motion has been carried 6 votes to 3. Those in favour were Councillor Brenda Abrandis, Councillor Lees, Mayor Milner, Councillor Raison, Councillor Russell and Councillor Waugh. Those against were Councillor D'Souza, Councillor Howling and Councillor Prendeville. Thank you all. That concludes item 6, and that brings us to item 7, which is closure. So before I close tonight's meeting, I'd like to thank everyone for their attendance and participation. I declare the meeting closed at 7 minutes past 8 p.m. Thank you all, and good night.